this is Cotton Soups and welcome back to another Lumion Legacy HTUC video, and today's video is on the second roamer ever to be released, and that is Ikazune. Ikazune, in my opinion, is actually pretty good, especially with that speed buff that it just got, so let's talk about it. From counters and checks and teammates to the sets and roles Ikazune can use, as well as its weaknesses and resistances, this video will teach you how to use and counter Ikazune. So, what role does Ikazune play? This question is pretty important because, as you can tell, you need to know what it does in order to use it, and we can answer this with its base stats. Its base stats are pretty simple. Basically, it doesn't have one of the best defenses ever. It's actually really bad. It is contending with Deldrix, Wendelin, and Imperior for one of the lowest defensive and HP combos, but it's generally okay, and it leans Ikazune into using maybe the clutch plushie, so that'll give you an idea of how bad its bulk is. And it does have good energy, range attack, and speed. 139 is the second or third highest in the game, I'm pretty sure. And 110 energy is really high as well. It does let Ikazune run power cuffs or just throw out a bunch of items. And its speed tier of 94 lets it outspeed Wintrix, or not outspeed Wintrix, but it does outspeed Zeppelin, C.B.O, Valkyrie, Wrestling, and it is contending with Wintrix and Eclipse in the same speed tier. And one last thing, its melee attack is 104. This is not really important, but it is noticeably very high. So, what role does Ikazune play? Ikazune can play a very strong and decently fast wall breaker, and not only that, Ikazune can also be a cleaning potential on your team, or it can be a Lumion that can be a great revenge killer, especially with specialty boots. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Ikazune's weaknesses and resistances. Ikazune's typing to fire and electric makes it so it is 4 times weak to water and earth. I know it says 2 times, but it's 4 times. Water types like C.B.O, Barblast, Luminami, and earth types like Cetamars, Tyrex, and Borak are some stuff you should be watching out for. Generally, you do have some comfortable matchups against some water types, but earth types, I wouldn't really recommend them unless Borak is kinda chipped. And it does have 5 resistances to fire, plant, ice, electric, air. Fire types like other Ikazunes, Chartikis, Pylons, and Seer Knights. Plant types like Totabs, mainly only Totabs. Ice types like Himber, Wintrix, Tundrelin, and maybe the new ice types that will be coming out in the Christmas event as well, and electric types like other Ikazunes, Halvantics, Zulongs, Joltooths, Iliguanas, and Metatoads, and lastly air types like Stratosaur, Zeppelin, Wintrix, Namare, Swirl, and some other stuff are some great stuff you can use your resistances. And you also do have one major resistance to metal, which means you can switch in on Valkyrie, Stratosaur, Tyrex, Oxydrake, and a lot more metal types. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Ikazune's sets. The Ikazune Wallbreaker set will be the main set here, and of course any ability works. I'm not gonna say that the secret ability is better and you must go for it, even though it is a lot better than Raging Fire. It's usable on Ikazune, so you don't really have to worry about going for the secret ability. And personality will be Smart, Frail, but Nimble can be the other choice, but this set will be running Smart, mainly because the Ikazune needs to do as much damage as possible, especially when it is a non-totemized Lumion, and of course, its speed tier is high enough to make it so it can outspeed some stuff, which is pretty good. And the items of choice, or moves of choice, Zip Zap, Flash, and Flee will be your main pivot moves. If you don't want to run these with 2 other attacks, which is mainly for the boot set, then you can run Magnify and Energy Surge, so it can be an all-out wall-breaking Ikazune. And of course, Fire Breath and Thunder Strike will be on every set because it's the best moves Ikazune has in terms of damage. And the items of choice, Volt or Flame Shell if you want to run these shells in case one thing on your team wants to run Power Cuffs, but this set will be running Power Cuffs. And of course you can run specialty boots if you want to use your pivot moves to make a great lead. Now, do remember that Ikazune is with specialty boots is probably worse than Phasenaut with its moves. So yeah, it's not really the best, but of course you can opt to run it, especially in a good UU team. And the HP and energy is so it can use 2 energy surges, or not 2 energy surges, but 2 magnifies, 1 energy surge, and a choice of 3 fire breaths or thunder strikes. 48 HP is the leftovers, and there is 8 TPs left over, I'm pretty sure, or 8 to 4 TPs left over, and they pretty much go into any stats, so you can use that. And 200 range attack and speed is to max out the offensive stats. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the counters and checks as well as Ikazune's teammates. Offensive counters and checks to Ikazune are pretty simple. You just want to run stuff that can hit it super effectively or completely outspeed it. Now, since Ikazune has boots, there is very few stuff that would like to switch in on an Ikazune. Buneki is probably the best one here because it's only weak to Fire Breath and the rest of it are immunities, so that's good. Imperior is pretty good because it does outspeed it, as well as Tauntab, Volkaloa, and Samurai. Samurai does hit it super effectively along with Volkaloa, but Tauntab not really being the best. It is pretty good because it does provide other stuff to the team, which is pretty great. And there are after mentions like Zulong, Protagon, and I guess you can include Hunter too. So yeah, and defensive counters and checks to Ikazune is just like the offensive ones. You just want to run stuff that can hit it super effectively or can switch in consistently. Stuff like Setomars, Iliguana, and Metatoad, mainly earth and electric types, are your best bet against Ikazune, considering it has no coverage for them. And an outlier to this is also Venilin. Venilin does do pretty well, especially the very clever heavy shield. And unless your Venilin is not running Mind Spatter, then Ikazune is not gonna have a great time against you. And of course, offensive teammates, you just want to run stuff that can help deal with electric and earth types, which is pretty simple. Plant types like Tatab and Colossochops do really well against both, since they both resist these typings, as well as Mocho. Mocho doesn't really have the best matchups against those, but it is pretty decent. And Kanibo, Valkyrie, and Eclipse are also after mentions. Kanibo is especially pretty great because it does take out both the water types and earth types with its water coverage. And Eclipse is overall pretty great because most of the teammates that Ikazune has are mostly weak to dark and light, especially these plant types. And Valkyrie also being good because if you pair Ikazune with the Ikazune Valkyrie Colossus Snack Core, it's gonna be pretty deadly. Not as deadly as before, but definitely pretty funny to use as of right now. And lastly, defensive teammates to Ikazune, they're just like the offensive ones, except they deal with Ikazune's weaknesses and overall do pretty well for the team. There are a bunch of stuff you can use, stuff like Barblast, Obsidian, Your Snack, Stratosaur, and Harvestect are all pretty great. Most of these guys do help out with Ikazune's weaknesses and resistances, and since they're pretty easy to cover, this means that making defensive cores for Ikazune and pretty much any team in general is pretty good and pretty easy. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the conclusion and my closing thoughts of Ikazune. So overall, I think Ikazune is a pretty good Lumion. Now it's not in my opinion, it's not anywhere near the meta. The meta might try and deal with it, like as in running stuff like Venilin, Iliguana a lot more, and of course Setomars is one of the most used ones competitive wise, so Ikazune does have to watch out for that. However, the barter Ikazune looks, or not barter, but the specialty boots Ikazune does look pretty deadly, more so of running pivot moves to help keep up offensive pressure. It's just the thing that Vasionot is probably a better user of that, and if you want to use a Wallbreaker Ikazune, it's probably outclassed by Valkyrie still, and a bunch more Wallbreakers like Zeppelin and Wintrix. So that's just my thoughts on it. Ikazune is still pretty good, so like the video if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're into these kind of videos. I have more of these videos on my channel, and of course remember that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.